Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the second Bliss and Laurel Park Master Landscape Plan. Tonight, we're joined by the students from the Conway School, as well as the citizens from the Save Our Parks group. I'm Lynn Simmons, manager, and I just want to go over just a couple, just some helpful meeting based on some feedback from the last virtual public forum. We're going to ask that everyone turn their camera off and also mute themselves. And then if you want to comment or have a suggestion or just need to speak, you can click participants on the bottom of the Zoom screen and raise your hand. We'll unmute you and you can speak. And so now I will kick it over to Fran to her welcome introduction.
Hi everyone, welcome. Tonight is exciting for Conway design team, Kara and Shane. The interactive portion of this design process with you precedes the final draft of our plan, which must be ready for a last review by our core team on June 16th. Between now and then, we'll be engaging with Kara and Shane as they refine what you will see tonight. Feedback. We will analyze restoration costs and future maintenance expenses for the preferred option, as these are also critical to this endeavor. The plan will be completed just before graduation on June 27th. Anticipate delivery of the printed final document sometime in mid-July. We'll share the document with the town via an interactive storyboard in early August. This storyboard will review the development process and lay out next steps before restoration work can begin on these parklands. Funding for all work will come from federal, state, local grant money. We are currently developing alliances that will assist us in securing this funding. From this point forward, our success is all about your engagement as stewards with us for these parklands. Please engage on the Longmeadow Town website to continue to receive updates. We need you to make this vision a reality. Now to Kara and Shane.
Thanks, Fran.
Hello, everybody. My name is Shane.
And I'm Kara.
And thank you so much for our second community meeting on the Bliss and Laurel Parks Sustainable Landscape Design Plan. So I'm going to go ahead and
So we'll spend probably about 20 to 30 minutes presenting our analysis of the site and some suggested design alternatives before we have a larger discussion. At the end of the questions through the chat, which is at the bottom of your screen. But here we go. All right. So what do you do when your beloved Olmsted-designed stream-fed pond fills with so much sediment that you can walk on it? These are the central questions facing the stewards of Bliss and Laurel Parks.
So this project was brought to us, as you know, by the Longmeadow Citizens to Save Our Parks, a local group of passionate residents within Longmeadow, but backed by the support of the town of Longmeadow. And so the stakeholders are all of you, which is why we're so happy to be speaking with you today and sharing our ideas with you. So in addition to this question of the sediment filling in Laurel Pond, the key issues that LCSOP in the town of Longmeadow also raised include addressing the stream banks along the stream in Bliss Park. Sorry about that. As well as managing invasive species and improving the trail network.
So Laurel, as you all know, is part of Cooley Brook, a small stream that starts in Bliss Park and flows directly into the Connecticut River. In the past, the brook originated from a ground spring seep, but now issues out of two stormwater culverts at the far end of Bliss Park. Here, the stream passes on the street into Laurel Pond and all the way out to the Connecticut. Both parks are primarily forested and used for their walking trails. This land was originally set aside to protect Longmeadow's water supply, which came from Cooley Brook. Some of the old reservoir infrastructure, now over 100 years old and abandoned, is still impacting the stream, and places burying it completely underground. In 1934, the Water Commission turned the land over to the Parks Department. A plan was developed by the Olmsted Brothers landscape architecture firm, and Laurel Pond was dug to their specifications. The pond parks today. Bliss Park has considerable active recreation facilities, including a swimming pool, ball fields, and an accessible playground. And well-used walking trails crisscross through the forests in both parks and are enjoyed by dog walkers, nature lovers, mountain bikers, and families. The parks are located along Meadow, and the waterway connection to the Connecticut River and proximity to the meadows, which are 1,700 acres of preserved floodplain, bring a rich diversity of wildlife to these 80 acres, which are otherwise surrounding a modern suburb. The areas around the park are entirely zoned for residential use, which means that the park users are mostly local primarily by walking and biking. The homes surrounding the park are affluent single-family between the 1920s and 1960s. And these neighborhoods surrounding the park are strikingly flat. Moderate hills in the parks, and Cooley Brook, as you all know, called a dingle, is a deep wooded valley. Because of its context in the neighborhood and its extensive trail network, folks often come 2 to 3 times a week and have strong connections to the pond.
So in our first community meeting a few weeks ago, and the survey that accompanied it, we were asking you about what you love about the parks, what you don't love, and what concerns are. So here's what we've heard so far about your ecological concerns. And the issues that are coming to the top are trails maintenance, dog waste, and litter. So in our mind, fortunately, there are some pretty simple solutions that exist for these top concerns. So Kara and I will be sort of digging into solutions for dealing with trail erosion and these other top issues in our plan set, submitting to the clients in late June. But for today's meeting, we really want to focus on what we see as being a much more complication of the stream restoration. So this issue here of sediment buildup in Laurel Pond, as well as the stream bank erosion along Cooley Brook, is really what we're going to be talking about today, because these are really critical ecological questions that we want to hear from you about.
Great. So there's a straightforward connection between the erosion in Cooley Brook by the headwaters and the buildup of sediment in Laurel Pond. The question is, why in certain spots are the banks eroding? On dry days, the amount of water coming out of those culvert waters is barely a trickle, and the water level in the brook is a low but steady flow. It seems inconceivable that this small amount of water could have such an erosive effect. What we learned is that the difference between a dry day and a large rain event are dramatic, as shown in this video. The two culverts at the headwaters, and this was taken 15 minutes after a large storm that dumped just over 2 rain in about an hour and a half. And as you can see, the banks are full. So it's now clear that the stormwater system, which collects water from the surrounding neighborhoods, is having a huge erosive impact on the stream banks. What you see here is a map of the stormwater drainage areas that drain into Cooley Brook. The stormwater system that affects the parks can be broken into 3 main sections based on the placement of drainage culverts. The 3 sections are the headwaters, Laurel Road, the neighborhoods there, and this western end of Laurel Park that has 3 culverts that drain just in that area. What is important to know is that while stormwater, the other thing I forgot to say, each of these sections they're each about 100 acres. And what is important to know is that while stormwater is entering Cooley Brook at several places, it's having the most erosive effect at the head. So we asked the question, why? Why is the stormwater having such an erosive impact here? One of our questions was, are there more impervious surfaces in the areas that drain into the headwaters, which is increasing the volume of water running into the stormwater system in that area? So we looked at impervious surfaces.
We looked at soils. So all throughout the park are different kinds of loamy sand soils. And around the stream channel is a particular kind of soil known as Windsorland. And this is a soil type that's excessively well draining and prone to erosion. So it makes sense that when the stream has these large amounts of stormwater at the headwaters, that all of this erosion is occurring. And Dingles and other areas of Long Meadows, we hear are similar forms of erosion. So it's kind of this sweet spot, or not sweet spot, between types and this heavy stormwater impact. And on this map, the areas in red have slopes greater than 25%. So these are slopes that are very unstable. And in some places, the stream bank is even really quite undercut, as you can see here. So yes, this is just another photo showing just the extent of the erosion right over at outfalls. So we have the erosion occur, and then proceeding sort of east to west, the stream is then channelized under Laurel Street, drains into Laurel Pond, where the sediment is filling in almost a third of the pond, and in some places creating just dry land. And then end of the park is a set of old dams, or an old pipes and reservoir walls from the infrastructure that used where the reservoir was. So this infrastructure seems to be backing up the water and creating a really slow moving water channel. And as you all probably know, the water in Laurel Park has quite a different than the channels in Bliss. In Laurel Park, there's much more algae, kind of a muckier, slower flowing water. So Kara and I, many things going on with the stream, that Kara and I tried to break it up into 4 distinct zones to really take it piece by piece. So the first area was really outside the park. It's almost impossible to separate the impact of the erosion in Bliss Park from the amount of stormwater that's coming in. And the first and really most important way to treat the stormwater is to increase the amount that's being infiltrated close to where it falls on the ground.
So some strategies for decreasing the amount of brook are aimed at increasing the porosity of the neighborhoods surrounding it, meaning finding ways to slow and sink stormwater into the stormwater drains and into Cooley Brook. Slowing and sinking the water before it reaches the storm drain brook. And these measures could also significantly reduce the amount of pollution and excessive nutrients from washing off roads and lawns. So these are some sort of large scale ways that could be implemented on city-owned lands. And the next important steps that homeowners could take on their own property to increase the porosity of their own yard. These include tree planting to intercept and absorb rainwater, rain barrels to capture water on site, permeable, and rain gardens to increase filtration and groundwater recharge. Moving on to the headwaters, we're looking at suggesting several different ways of reshaping the stream channel to spread and slow the water, specifically at the headwater outfalls stream banks. So a first suggestion is to slow at the outfalls. And one way of doing this would be to build dry detention basins at the culverts and the headwaters. These boulder-lined bowls would give large volumes of water space to spread and therefore slow down before passing over a small check dam and flowing into the brook. Regular low-flow storm events would just pass right through the check dam, and so wouldn't be developing any sort of still water or pond. They would just flow right through, but the large storm events would have a moment to sort of settle and slow, continued on into the brook. The second suggestion is to widen the stream channel. Finding selective spots below the headwaters to widen the stream channel would also help to reduce the velocity of water moving down the brook. This would involve regrading selective spots along the stream bank to restore a lower, wider floodplain that would again give high volume flows a chance to spread and slow. The important thing to note is this needs to be done sparingly because it would require removal of trees and extensive earth moving, which before it was replanted contribute to more sediment moving downstream.
Yeah, and so after banks are widened, the stream channel stabilized a little bit more, adding vegetation would help really stabilize those banks for the long term, especially as the vegetation matures. And using vegetation specifically as opposed to more techniques such as riprap is thought to provide multiple benefits. You know, it's filtering out pollutants, it's holding the soil in place with the roots, it's providing habitat for wildlife, and it's reducing the velocity of the water. Whereas riprap is really just kind of redirecting the velocity of the water in the opposite direction. So this is an example for all of these really are examples of soft solutions to stream restoration. So the idea that we'll mention is building in-stream structures such as the cross vein pictured here. So a cross vein is aiming to redirect the velocity of the water in towards the center of the channel, where it sort of settles a little bit, pools, sediment can sink to the bottom, and sort of pulling the velocity away from the banks of the stream and towards the center. And we'll talk about how all of these stream restoration techniques overlap with some of the other ideas we have for the pond. But for now, let's jump ahead to this is a photo of the portion where the stream seemingly disappears, probably under a pipe or in a pipe under this bank here. So Kara and I have a couple of different ideas of how to restore this area. The first one is just to naturalize the stream entirely, just remove all the infrastructure, the old pipes, the reservoir walls, and just let the stream return to a much more natural meandering shape. And this can be supported by some of the stream restoration techniques we just spoke about, but overall would be pretty low. And this would have the aesthetic impact of clearing up the water and reducing some of that algae and duckweed with faster flowing water.
Option number 2, Woodland Pond, suggests that while it's clear that unburying the stream, which seems to have be buried under a portion pool that collapsed in 1955 and it's simply that collapsed material is just there. It was never removed. So all of these invasive species and kind of this derelict infrastructure is kind of the consequence of just abandoning that space. But while it's clear that unburying the stream and restoring the natural channel would be a clear ecological benefit, the question structure, including the old reservoir, is not. Keeping the reservoir basin and the small check dam that holds it in place would preserve the water and allow it to remain a haven for turtles, birds, and frogs. In addition, there would be less disturbance to the area around the basin, which currently has a high level of invasive species.
Okay, and now onto the design crux. So we call the pond the design crux because it seems like there's many different directions that it could go in. So 3 different design alternatives, which we've presented in a moment. But first, this is just a snapshot from our first community meeting when we asked, where do you love going in Laurel Park? So it's clear from the dozens of hearts over Laurel Pond that this is a community.
Right. You showed us that you love going to Laurel Pond. There was some worry and concern over the health of the water and the future of the pond that is filling with sediment. And so we really, this is the question coming to you tonight with about what you want to see for the future of this pond moving forward. So we're going to start with existing conditions. The pond was originally dug only in 1934, so it's a fairly recent addition to this landscape. It's about 3/4 of an acre and is held in place by a stone and cement eastern edge. About half of the pond has filled with sediment accumulated from stormwater runoff, creating marsh and even dry land in spots. I know some people have concern about the sediment attracted to it. There are great wildlife viewing opportunities, and many families come to explore this lively ecological scene.
Okay, so on to our design alternatives. And we'll show 3 designs. They're all very, we're still very much at the conceptual stage. So the first design we call Open Waters. So this is a design that really seeks to restore the pond to its 1934 Olmsted shape. So clearing out a lot of the sediment that has formed in the eastern portion of the pond, adding a deck to provide fishing opportunity, and this pond is maybe restocked with fish again. There's a patio area with a covered seating, views of this beautiful open water landscape. And there's a grove of trees that's installed behind this overlook area to buffer the pond from the parking lot above. This design has a few pros. This is a sort of design shape that a lot of people really love. So it pays homage to that cultural tradition. And as it does to the fond memories many Longmeadow residents have of fishing derbies and that aspect to the pond. But on the other hand, this removing sediment is a very expensive and ecologically process. In the process of dredging, all of the organisms that call that habitat home are essentially removed or harmed. And there's a question too, if this pond water from the streets and that pollution is in the sediment, then where is that sediment going? And usually it's just to another community. So there's some ecological questions here. It also does remove or reduce the sort of wildlife opportunities that many seem to enjoy.
The second design alternative is called Pond Stewards, and it's built around creating a more manageable pond system. It does this by designating a smaller planted sediment pond built by pinching in the sides of the pond and adding a small stone check dam in this area. This would give sediment a chance to settle out before the water flowed into the rest of the pond. On the open portion of water-loving plants and stone are added to the edges to increase wildlife and help prevent erosion and stabilize the shoreline. And access to the water is increased by a footbridge and some viewing platforms and several other stone landings along the edges. So this pond include recreation. It mixes the active and passive recreation that has been there for a while. Community resources for fishing and skating. The deeper waters might support more fish, and the small planted sediment pond could continue to support the frogs. The sediment pond helps to reduce heavy metals and hydrocarbons in the main, and routine sediment maintenance would be simplified. Some cons to think about is that the pond would need to be used as in the first design, and the sediment basin would need to be built, and that sediment by our ongoing and consistent maintenance, though might be slightly simplified with the smaller area. As Shane said, that contaminated sediment is brought to another community to store. A access road may need to be constructed to ensure that sediment removal could happen easily. and this design might not support as much wildlife.
Okay, and our last design is really a full embrace of the natural processes that are already happening. This design is the most sort of hands-off. It would require no sediment removal, and instead it just allows the pond to sort of continue along its natural ecological progression and transform. In the eastern portion of this design, larger woody vegetation is encouraged to grow in, as it already is. And the shade of this canopy provides a comfortable, shady place to sit and watch wildlife. In the western portion of the marsh, perhaps minimal maintenance removes larger woody vegetative plants to keep more of an open view. So here's a photo just showing the laced across a marsh. It also incorporates a community pergola for small group gatherings. And this is just a photo to inspiration of how beautiful marshes can be. But they're not just beautiful. Wetlands provide really, really important ecological services, especially when this is a waterway that's receiving polluted water from the streets. Wetlands are especially capable of filtering and removing heavy metals and pollutants. So sort of function as sponges. So in a heavy rain event, they can hold a lot of water and then release it very slowly. So especially as climate change is causing flashier, larger storms, this is very helpful in reducing the flooding risk downstream. And just that wetlands are really crucial habitat for species that have a hard time finding habitat elsewhere. So over a third of all endangered species live in wetlands. And it can be beautiful. I mean, a couple cons of the design might be that more insects could be attracted to the area. The Olmsted classic design is lost, and there would not be as much fishing. So we are very curious to hear what you all think. We're gonna pause here and open it up to questions before continuing. So let me just, I wanna end this.
So we'll spend about 15 minutes taking questions on the presentation. Please write them into the chat. And we'll sort of go through them. I'm not sure if we'll be able to hit all of them, but we'll do our best. Do we know how many times we have dredged the pond since 1934? I don't know. I checked the records, the town meeting records for the 80s, because I heard it had been dredged in the 80s. And there was a line item in 1980, dredging of Laurel Pond. And at the time, it cost $280 to dredge the pond. I think that number is much higher these days. What are the approximate initial costs with each design? We have for the designs, certainly, I believe that the second design would be the most expensive to implement. It does involve the most sort of like earth removal and construction of the sediment pond itself. The first one of just digging out the pond would probably be the next most expensive, and then the marsh would be the least expensive.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how I can both show this final slide and also see the questions, but I can't, so leave that up to you, Kara.
Nathan Stanaway says, love the second option, nice balance between traditional design and wildlife preservation. Kids love having a place to see frogs, muskrats, and turtles. like Betsy says, I like the second option, but will there still be fishing? That's a great question. I think we need to do more research about what kind of fish would do well in a pond of this size. And we know that we have heard that in years past, the town has stocked the pond, but that these days it's not a great environment for the fish. Fran says, how do people feel about retaining the reservoir and how that might impact our decision on Laurel Pond?
Okay, I see the chat now. Can clarify. Option 2 eliminates the wetland shown the line basin.
Right, so they would construct sort of a settling pond. It would have a hard bottom, so that would be sort of the removal of sediment could be more routine and easy to manage so that you know where that bottom is. But the sides of it could and maintain that natural edge. How deep is the pond? It's a great question. I don't know. I don't know if will it be expensive to remove reservoir cement and structure? Again, we haven't done any pricing or cost estimating. We really wanted to hear sort of what people's vision was for how they want to steward the land in a long-term fashion.
Do we have a sense of the level of contaminants? We don't currently, as no water quality testing has taken place in the brook, but it's likely that this will be added to the Connecticut River Conservancy's list of annual sites. So it will be nice to have more information about that in the future, and that can help guide some of these decisions around stream restoration. But at the moment, we do not know how quality is. But given that it's draining directly from impervious streets and yards, it seems likely that there would be high hydrocarbon pollutants from the roadways. Pollutants.
And excess nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus and yards. Paulson says, is there somewhere that we can see more of the original 1935 Olmsted design? Say in the library. I know we have a copy of it, which is not that helpful. And we'll certainly we'll put a copy of it in the final report. I suspect, as Betsy says, the Historical Society has a copy. Mm-hmm. Mark Gold says, recently done an I&I study on storm sewers as part of the federal, and there may be data on volume and source of the DPW. Great. I've been sort of collaborating with DPW about the stormwater system and the drainage areas, but we don't have that data on the volume that's draining into the brook. Mm-hmm. Are people willing to consider catch basins in the eastern section? Understood. Yep. So to me, what does the community pergola look like in number 3? Could it be an outdoor classroom or picnic area?
Yeah, I was kind of envisioning something similar to this image. So just a covered area with either some seating, benches, or a table, which in a COVID era, when we are allowed to gather in large groups again, might be nice, especially for classrooms to come visit and have some educational exposure. Okay, so maybe let's take another minute or two for questions, and then we're going to open it up to it. So we're going to ask you to vote for your preferred design for both the lower reservoir and also for the pond.
Dave says, have you looked at the removal of fallen trees over Cooley Brook in the reservoir? I know, Dave, you asked this question, and I always kind of skirt around it because I think it's, I I think it's sort of and it depends. I think clearly aesthetic reasons to remove some of the larger trees, especially near the footbridge by Laurel Pond. Maybe, I know Shane has suggested moving them parallel to the banks of the stream so that you're not losing all of the kind of benefits of those tree trunks for habitat. But I don't think that there's necessarily a hard and fast rule if you always remove them or you always have to keep them there. I think it's sort of a tree by tree basis of seeing how the water flow and if you want the water to slow down or speed up.
Okay, so Andy is commenting that this design should consider migrating river herring, bluebacks, and Woodland Pond could be a detriment to a migratory fish, given that background. Yeah, that's a really good point. Because Cooley Brook used to be spring fed, it likely was a cold groundwater seep, but given the stormwater entering the stream currently, I think further research is necessary to really evaluate what fish and wildlife are living in the waterway currently. Yeah, what kind of restoration would be possible. We have talked to the Conservation Commission about these designs, and it likely would involve, any of these designs would involve permitting from the Conservation Commission, but Kara, maybe you can jump in here. It wouldn't require state level permitting. Is that correct?
I think that's unclear. I think that's unclear. I think that there is, if you want to do work along a perennial stream or a waterway, permitting is required, which is a good thing. We want to make sure that we're doing the best thing in protecting these waterways and keeping them clean. But yes, permitting would be required. I don't think it's something that would necessarily stop the work from going forward. There's interest from the Conservation Committee in, restoring the ecology of this waterway.
Just want the area.
I don't know why I can't hear anything.
Right now, we're not talking. we're waiting to see if we got any more questions.
There's a good question.
Videos, I think that's why.
Let me
Has the swampy pond been in existence long enough that conservation or permitting agencies consider it a wetland, requiring mitigation if we destroy it by building option 2? That is a really interesting question.
It's unmuted, but I'm not getting any sound.
We will need to check to see if I don't think it is, but we should check on that.
And question from Dave, are there different types of long-term maintenance with the 3 plans? So any of the plans that are going for more of an open water pond are going to require continual maintenance. And by maintenance, I mean removing sediment, which is a very intensive process. The third design would not require that. So that's the biggest difference. And yeah. So thinking about long-term maintenance, I think that's the main thing to consider.
Fran asked, can we predict the level of insect impact? think that's a hard one. It might go up, but it's hard to predict.
Okay, Kara, should we take a vote? Oh, one more question. Do the boardwalks in 3 also support bikes within the East Bay bike path? Currently, or at least in this design, I was sort of thinking the boardwalks more as walking paths, just because probably there will be people congregating, and having bikers riding through might be a little bit chaotic. But if there's no pedestrians on, then I think they would support, you know, the weight of a bicyclist perfectly. All right. So let's talk about the 2 alternatives we discussed for the lower reservoir area. So the first being to remove all of the infrastructure, in a sense, drain the reservoir and have that waterway return to a stream. And the second idea would be to keep some of the reservoir infrastructure, remove all the reservoir walls, so that still there's a small body of water there. Lynn is going to put up a poll.
Do we want to say something about engineering?
We do, yes. So an important caveat here is that this is an area that I've not been able to fully assess. You know, we have sort of just basic observations of what we can see, but we don't know really what infrastructure is underground and what would be possible from an engineering perspective. So a very, very rough sort of feedback gathering from you all to just see how interested you are in retaining water down there, as opposed to just allowing the stream to fully naturalize. So, Lynn, are you there with the poll? Great, thank you. So, great, they both came up. So yeah, the first question is this slide, and then the second one is about the pond designs. And if you didn't see all of it late, you don't need to respond.
I also wanted to say that it's not necessarily a vote. Sort of the design and the restoration of this waterway is going to be an ongoing conversation tonight and into the future.
Right. This is really just a way of sort of taking the temperature and gauging what you all are most drawn to, but there will be some very, this will be a long process, and engineers will come on board and stream restoration experts will come on board and really evaluate these options further, and then really price out the costs of each of these 3 designs. And ultimately, the costs will roll and what is feasible. Okay, so we have 65% of participants voting so far.
Dave asked, what is the impact on the water level of the dam? What is going on there is not entirely clear. When I went and checked it out, it seemed like there's a bit of a check dam on the edge of the reservoir into a kind of rectangular culvert, and then it heads to this area where I think the old wading pool was, that has collapsed into a giant sinkhole, which looks like a dam, but I don't think it was ever designed as a dam so much as between the reservoir and this old wading pool. So I don't think that the removal of what looks like that dam would have necessarily an Dave's correcting me, the dam on Laurel Pond, or the impact on the water be?
Do you moving the dam?
Yeah, removing the dam at Laurel Pond.
So none of the designs currently propose removing the dam entirely. The third design, which I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, but the third design recommends just lowering the dam slightly, but keeping most of it in place. Okay, if there's anyone who hasn't yet voted but would like to, maybe put a message in the chat to let us know you still need more time. Otherwise, we'll close it in just a minute. Okay. All right. So I'm going to end the poll.
What we'd like to do next is take some time to kind of talk about the pond stewards designs to have gotten the most votes. But we don't want to end the conversation there. What we're going to do next is we're actually going to ask you to discuss in small groups that design, the pond stewards design. In these small groups, they're called breakout rooms. You don't have to do anything. You will be assigned to a breakout room. You'll get to meet some new people. There probably will be about 4 or 5 people in your group. And when you're in your group, you can we would love for you to talk about what you like about the design, but also what you think would be some improvements to the idea of the pond stewards design. Some of the amenities that you would like, concerns about the implications of that design. And you'll probably have about 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back and sparing that discussion on the chat. So, Lynn, could you break us up into breakout rooms?
I can certainly try.
So let's say if we do 6 rooms.
Okay.
You guys should have I think a window will pop up.
And I'm going to share the PDF of the design first.
Oh, wait. So you see a window pop up that says the host is inviting you to join breakout room. You can click join. Yes, we are ending the LCTV portion. Thank you, Tracy. So Lynn, in 10 minutes, could you end the breakout rooms?
Sure.